Tonight on Primetime Politics, motion defeated.
Je déclare la motion rejetée.
The Conservative attempt to bring down the Trudeau Liberals fail, but does it create more pressure on opposition parties to pull the plug and trigger an early election? We'll get into the issue. Also, expanding medically assisted death. Quebec will move ahead without Ottawa's blessing, allowing people to pre-plan the procedure if their conditions make it impossible to do so down the road. We'll get reaction from the federal health minister and ask if Ottawa will challenge the Quebec move. Plus,
it is important to leave now.
Leaving Lebanon. With the fighting between Israel and the militant group Hezbollah intensifying, we'll examine what it would take to get Canadians on the ground out of harm's way. This is Primetime Politics. Hello everyone, I'm Michael Serapio. Well, as expected, the Trudeau government will live on for another day. The Conservative motion to bring that government down failing this afternoon, with the NDP and the Bloc Québécois voting to keep Parliament going.
I think what we're seeing today is that, this House does not have confidence in the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. And that is something that, what we hear from the opposition parties is just how bad he would be for Canada.
But to underline just how testy this Parliament already is, the vote did not happen without some questionable words being exchanged, an apparent insult that was not captured by House mics, and then this statement from the Prime Minister.
Standing up to bullies requires us to call them out on their crap sometimes, and that's what I will do.
Now, if you did not hear the word, well, it is an alternate word for feces, which the Prime Minister was asked to withdraw and eventually did. With more, we're now joined by Stephanie Levitz, senior parliamentary reporter with the Globe and Mail, and Chris Nardi, parliamentary reporter with the National Post. Hello to both of you.
Hello.
So listen, we're going to talk about the non-confidence motion in a moment, but first I want to begin with your reaction to the obvious animosity and the antics that we saw in the House today. Stephanie?
Well, I think actually you can take both together, because you have to wonder, how can Parliament hang on? How can this environment in question period, which is toxic and harsh and I don't even know how to describe it anymore at this point. It's not productive, I guess. It's just not productive. And if this is what question period is, and not to say the question period as of late, and by as of late I mean over the last several years, has been such a moment of accountability in the life cycle of a government. But if they can't even get through 5 minutes of a question period now with any measure of decorum, how are they going to get through anything amounting to a legislative agenda?
Yeah, absolutely. Chris?
I can't help but count. There are 90 days left of this. We are the midweek of the second week of Parliament, and they're already calling themselves feces-related terms. It's really spectacular. I don't necessarily think that what happens in QP is necessarily symptomatic of what happens at every other moment, but when you take the ensemble of it, what's going on at committees, there's obstruction from all parties at kind of all times, but the opposition's a little bit more. When you think of just all these shenanigans that are going on that Canadians aren't necessarily always watching, you really have to wonder, how long can it last, like Steph said.
Yeah, although, you say Canadians are not really watching, but this is the type of thing that they will see because it stands out as an example of something you don't want to see. But, here we have the Conservatives moving forward with this motion. It was guaranteed to lose. Add on to it the antics that we saw today. Was anything gained by the party moving forward with this confidence motion?
What was interesting to me, again, to go back to question period, right, is that it was clear at some point, I thought, that Mr. Poilievre was a bit rattled by how Mr. Trudeau was acting, because Mr. Poilievre himself dialed himself back. He dialed back his tone. He kind of quieted a bit. Seemed for a moment that he wondered, have I lost the upper hand? I usually have the upper hand. In introducing the confidence motion, what you saw was Mr. Poilievre following through on something he said he would do. And that is perhaps a testament, I'm being charitable, but I think it's a reflection of Mr. Poilievre himself. He says the same things over and over and over again, and he generally does what he says he's going to do. He had said, once the NDP pulled out of the supply and confidence agreement, I will introduce a motion of non-confidence at the earliest opportunity. This was the earliest opportunity, so he went ahead and did it. Why he's going ahead with continuing so quickly, we're expecting another round of this tomorrow, that I'm not sure. I'm not sure what there is to gain in that respect.
Yeah, Chris, how would you answer that question? Has the party gained anything by going ahead with this motion, knowing full well that the NDP and the Bloc were not going to support it, and then add on to the drama that we saw today?
Well, I think that they gained as in they stuck to their guns. Their base fully expects them to try to make this government fall at all opportunities. The polls tell them they should try to run into an election as quickly as possible. And so everything that the Conservatives, one can suspect, will be doing for the next few months is trying to create an election at any opportunity. I agree with Stephanie. I don't know why they would redo it tomorrow instead of trying to push another motion that could force, wedge the Liberals into another corner. And also what Stephanie was saying, I was watching QP as well. I actually saw it a little bit differently. When I noticed that Pierre, as she said, Mr. Poilievre had really pulled back, I wondered if he was actually kind of thinking of the clip. Well, I've often seen him run these YouTube videos that say, Prime Minister explodes, wacky Prime Minister says. And if he wasn't trying to pose himself as I'm the rational, reasonable, slow-talking individual, and here's the Prime Minister that's, dropping feces-related terms in the House, and try to flip it as in, the wacky Prime Minister's talking, I'm the reasonable one, because that is largely a mission that he has to, or a message that he has to try to sell to voters, that he is serious.
And he said as much, right? He made that reference in question period. Look, the Prime Minister's lost his mind. He used these descriptors suggesting the Prime Minister was out of control and had gone nuts. And again, I agree with Chris. You could see the viral video clip almost in the making.
Yeah, it's interesting. As you say that, though, you hear Liberals in this session, since it began a week and a half ago, basically saying that these kinds of motions from the Conservatives will prove to Canadians that the Conservative Party is doing nothing but playing politics, while Liberals will, put their nose to the grindstone and work for Canadians on serious policy matters. Does that message stick, one, in general, and two, given what we saw in the House today?
It's a fair question, right? You have to wonder at this point, do any Canadians actually believe that's what the Liberals are doing? And that becomes the question. Are they willing to say, well, these just political games, the Liberals are really working hard for me? I'm not sure that Canadians are there, because if they were there, the polls might reflect that. Are Canadians, by and large, enamored of the shenanigans in Parliament? Are the Canadians going to look at Mr. Poilievre's party and his antics and say, man, that doesn't seem like a party that's quite ready to govern. I'm not sure how I'm going to park my vote. That could very well be true. But to respond positively to the Liberals, I don't know that could also be true.
Chris?
Well, I think that Canadians are looking at the House, the few Canadians who are looking at question period, and they're noticing that the whole thing has gone crazy. But as Stephanie says, the Liberals don't really have that kind of flagship policy to grip on. When you ask the Prime Minister, why are you staying on? He's like, well, there's so much more work to do. What is it? Well, we got to finish passing legislation. That's not a grand goal that gets you elected, like in 2015 when he said we're going to build all these infrastructure projects, for example. Or even, Pierre Poilievre, who says, I'm going to make everything better. Like, that's already a little bit more lofty than what it feels like the Liberals are doing. So the Liberals are going to keep delaying this insofar as they, and until they can find a reason why Canadians should elect them and hopefully reverse their fortunes in the poll. And again, the Conservatives are going to keep trying to make them fall insofar as they're doing very well in the polls.
Yeah, it does make you wonder how long this Parliament can stand. Although, we have a few things that they're percolating. We know, for example, the NDP want pharmacare passed, which will be sometime early October, it seems. We have Mark Holland coming up. We'll speak to him about that in a moment. As well as the fact that we have the Bloc Québécois laying out their demands today, saying if you meet our demands, we're going to support you till after Christmas. Do you think any of that's going to happen, or are we headed towards an earlier election than that?
Well, one of the things the Bloc, of course, said was that they would bring them down eventually after sometime of October 29th, right? So it doesn't presume that there will be an election on, an election call on October 29th, unless the Bloc chooses, I suppose. And I think that's it. We're in a period of volatility and instability. Anything is in fact possible. With virtual voting, you could imagine a scenario where people screw up and all of a sudden it looks like the government's going to fall and then it isn't. It's just, this is what minority governments look like. And the NDP's agreement with the Liberals really erased that volatility. That if you think back, Canadians, we've had more minority parliaments in the last sort of more than a decade or so, 2 decades, then we've had majority parliaments. This is more the normal life cycle, maybe absent the toxicity.
Chris?
I think the Bloc is probably the party that has the largest incentive to now keep the current form of government in place. In fact, the happiest person in Parliament right now is Yves-François Blanchet, because he recaptured that kind of balance of powers that he didn't have during the agreement. And so, sure, he says, pass these 2 bills that I support for Quebec until October 28th, but I wouldn't be surprised if he comes forward and says, all right, here's new conditions, because insofar as he can come back to Quebecers and say, look what I have done, I've forced the Liberals to do this, his calculation is that Quebecers will continue to think that he is doing a great job, and he will remain popular, because it doesn't really matter who's in government. The Bloc's always going to be the minority, and this, I suspect, for them is the best minority situation that they could ask for pending another election, in which they could lose that status of balance of powers if the Conservative come in as a majority.
Okay. Stephanie Levitz, Chris Nardi, thank you for that.
Thank you.
So we mentioned the Bloc Québécois, and they did today set out conditions for their continued support of the government. Leader Yves-François Blanchet saying he wants 2 private member bills put forward by the Bloc passed by October 29th. They are Bill C-319, which boosts OAS payments by 10% for people aged 65 to 74, and Bill C-282, which would protect supply-managed farms from future trade talks. Now, if the Liberals pass them, Blanchet says his party will not vote against the Liberals until after Christmas. If they don't, he will begin talks, he says, with the other parties to bring the government down. Well, to Quebec now, as the province says it will move forward with advance requests for medically assisted death, allowing people to apply for MAID if they have a condition that will prevent them from doing so in the future. Now, Quebec is doing this in contravention of Canada's criminal code. The province did ask for changes in the code. They have not happened, and Quebec says it can no longer wait. It will start its expansion of MAID at the end of October, instructing Quebec's Director of Criminal Prosecutions to refrain from enforcing the federal law. Well, joining us right now is Canada's Minister of Health, Mark Holland. Minister, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Listen, we have a few things to talk about, but I need to talk about the confidence vote today. Even with its failure to pass, I wonder if it concerns you that essentially this one motion creates more pressure for all opposition parties to trigger an election perhaps sooner than expected.
Well, I mean, I guess the thing about the Conservatives is they've always wanted an election. They wanted an election the day after the last election. They've never had confidence in the government, never had any interest in working with us. So, this isn't anything new, and it's not new to minority parliaments. I think what Canadians are going to look at is, what are you focused on? Are you focused on trying to help people and make them better? In my case, really focused on dental, on pharmacare, on the bilateral agreements that we've signed, on data and interoperability, and they're focused on politics. And I think every day that they focus on politics and not Canadians, then people see that that's where their heart is centered. And, we have elections. They're going to happen. There's a set date. And I think in between those elections, people would like to focus on them and getting things done for them. And the Conservatives from day one in this Parliament have been focused on themselves and their politics and measuring office space as opposed to, how do they help Canadians?
Is that enough of an argument, though? Because, no surprise, your party's been trailing Conservatives by double digits for a year now. How election ready are you if the plug is pulled on this Parliament?
Well, look, in a minority government, you always got to be ready for an election. For sure we're ready. But the question is, when do you focus on election and when do you focus on getting things done? For us, we're focused on the business of governing, and we have opposition parties, not in the form of the Conservatives, but the Bloc and the NDP, who continue to be interested in talking about how we can make things better. That's what we're focused on. So, could there be an election? Of course, we always got to be ready for that. But my instinct is that people aren't looking for more politics in their life. They're not looking to, hear more partisan talking points and slogans. They're really interested in solutions. And right now, it's a tough time. It's not hard. I don't care what country you're in. You pick what the incumbent government is doing well. Every incumbent government's got these challenges. And so, it doesn't, a 10-year-old with a Google search can tell you what's wrong in the world. There's no courage in that. There's no vision in that. At some point, the Conservatives are going to have to look people in the face and tell them what they're going to do. What are they going to do with dental care? What are they going to do with pharmacare? So, yeah, they're doing well right now, just lighting everything on fire and saying what's broken. But at some point, they're going to have to say what they're going to do differently. That's a big shift that will happen in a campaign. And right now, in my view, it's not time for that.
Okay, so that is the motion of non-confidence. Let's switch over now to medically assisted death in Quebec, because as you know, the province is moving ahead, allowing people to essentially make arrangements for MAID now if their diagnoses down the road makes it impossible for them to request the procedure. They're doing so without any type of amendment in the criminal code. Are you concerned about this move? Are they violating the law?
So, I mean, on the legal aspect, obviously that's being reviewed, and the Minister of Justice, the Attorney General, would have a view on that as he's developing it. But I can just speak more broadly. First of all, I have enormous sympathy for this. My grandmother had Alzheimer's. It was devastating for our family to watch her go through that journey, and she was in a long-term care facility for 12, 13 years, the last 10 of which, it wasn't even that she didn't recognize us. She really was in a vegetated state. It was devastating for our family. So I have enormous sympathy for this. But I also think, we need as a country to be able to ask the question, how would this function? And it's been our entire history that this hasn't been available. So I think doing it right, making sure that we have conversations, the system is ready, making sure that there's a conversation that happens nationally. I mean, that to me just makes a lot of sense. So, Quebec, I fully respect both their jurisdiction and their position. But, saying we've got to do it tomorrow and, we're not willing to have a conversation other than just do it tomorrow, we're going to have to look at that because to me, it's the kind of thing I don't want to get wrong. It's the kind of thing that I think we need to make sure as a country we get right and that we really interrogate where we're going on it.
Okay, but as you're trying to make sure that, all your I's are dotted and your T's crossed, here you have Quebec moving ahead. They say they're going to start allowing this to happen by the end of October. Is your government going to challenge that in court? Because again, they're doing this without any type of amendment in the criminal code.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's fair to say is it was just a week or two ago that they put their proposal forward. That, as you can appreciate, doing a legal analysis of something takes a little bit of time. That's being undertaken right now. There's internal conversations, and we're going to come with what our response is very shortly. We're not quite there yet. We need a little bit more time, but, that's under active consideration.
Okay, under active consideration. Is your government waiting for this to be decided by the courts? Because there was a parliamentary committee last year that essentially says this is something that Canada as a whole should be moving forward with. So with that recommendation, is what you're waiting for now basically an order from the court to do so?
No, I mean, I think what we're doing is, as an example for my part, I'm looking forward to a conversation with my provincial and territorial colleagues. I really need to hear where things are at for them. We need to understand what implication a change in one jurisdiction would have to other jurisdictions. I'm having active conversations and have for a long time with sort of the system writ large, the health system writ large around its level of preparedness, its concerns. These things need to be deliberative and iterative. And, that doesn't mean you wait forever, but it means you do have to do that sort of foundational work to understand. And so, as well as for Canadians themselves to really think this thing through, if you and I are to stop and have a talk about, our loved ones and what situation they might be in, or even ourselves, I don't think we talk enough about death, and we tend to avoid these conversations. So I think there's a good opportunity there for us even to have those conversations in our own homes about, how it should function and what would work for us or how should it work for the country.
Now, before you're gone, you mentioned pharmacare now before the Senate. What's the update there?
Well, I think conversations are going very well in the Senate. I appear before Senate committee having conversations with either my team or I, practically every minute of every day with senators, getting them information they're requesting. They have a date of October 10th to have it exit the Senate. And we're ready to go. In a parallel process, I've been working with provinces and territories, saying, look, if we can get royal assent, what a deal might look like. It's one of the reasons in British Columbia we had the Memorandum of Understanding to sort of outline what a deal might look like. And what I thought was really exciting there was it wasn't just contraceptives and diabetes medication. We were able to go a step further and say also menopause hormone therapy, which is huge for women there. We did a great announcement at BC Women's Hospital. So I'm very anxious to get out there and get those deals signed because these are drugs people need. These are drugs that are going to really save lives, to be quite frank, and really make a difference on affordability.
I'm hearing that royal assent by October the 10th. Is that what you're hearing?
That's what I'm saying. That's kind of where things seem to be going at this point in time, but we're taking nothing for granted.
Okay. Mark Holland, appreciate the time.
Thanks so much.
Well, to Lebanon now, where the United Nations says tens of thousands of people have been displaced, driven from their homes by the Israeli air offensives that have targeted hundreds of Hezbollah positions in the country since Monday. Global Affairs here in Canada confirming that 2 Canadians in Lebanon are among the dead. prompting the foreign minister to once again call for rapid de-escalation in the fighting and making this statement today.
What I say to Canadians now in Lebanon, not only is it time to leave, but also commercial flights are still available. And it is, at the end of the day, the most safe and the simplest way to come back home.
Well, with more on the situation in Lebanon, we're now joined by Louis de Lormier, who from 2005 to 2008 was Canada's ambassador to that country. Monsieur de Lormier, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
You know, we heard Mélanie Joly, the foreign minister, once again calling for de-escalation between Israel and the militant group Hezbollah. But, you know, we've heard international calls for de-escalation when it comes to Israel and Gaza. That seems to have fallen on deaf ears. Are you concerned that no one is listening to these international calls?
Well, yes, I'm concerned. Obviously, a red line has been crossed during last weekend, and now Israel is intensifying its attacks on Hezbollah in Lebanon. Of course, there are enormous diplomatic efforts by the U.S., by France, by the United Nations to de-escalate, but the tendency right now is to escalate. But it's not gone as far as a regional war yet. It's between Israel and Hezbollah, and that's been going on for quite a while. As a matter of fact, that started after the 7th of October last year, when the Hamas did this horrific massacre in Israel. So it's an escalation, but it's not a regional war at this time yet.
Not yet a regional war, but Canada and Global Affairs continue to urge Canadians to leave Lebanon. They're urging Canadians to seek commercial flights out while they can. But, you know, also this warning that Canada does not have any plans right now to assist with departure. At what point would that change, if at all?
Well, I'm surprised. But first, let me explain just a little bit. In 2006. The first thing, there was a war between Israel and Hezbollah, and the first thing that the Israelis did was to bomb the airport, so you didn't have the option of leaving by commercial flights. And this is when Canada and all other countries, all other major countries, started these evacuations. I'm quite puzzled by what Minister Joly is saying, that there might not be evacuation, because if the Israelis cripple the airport, I don't see what else can be done by the population, by Canadians in Lebanon to leave the country. You have to leave by sea. You have to go to Cyprus. And I heard that Canada was doing extensive preparations to do this. So I'm sort of wondering what's happening here.
Mm-hmm. So some questions. And you mentioned 2006, and of course you were very much involved in that evacuation. 15,000 people were able to leave with your help and the help of the consular team on the ground in Lebanon. But how difficult was it to coordinate that operation? Because to your point, if the government's not helping Canadians now, it would seem that would be more complicated down the road.
It's extremely complicated. You can't just tell people to line up and tell them to go on the ship and let the ship sail like that. You have to have a huge team here of specialists in immigration, for example, consular people, security, of course, people, Canadian Armed Forces. At one point, I think we had about 100 members of the Canadian government working on this, and that made it possible for us to evacuate so many people. You have to have a team in Cyprus, and in 2006, we had a team in Turkey, and so. It's a huge enterprise, and it costs a lot of money, but I wonder if we can just tell people to lay low and or find their own way, because this war could get very, very dangerous for Canadian citizens.
Well, dangerous, as you say, and already Global Affairs have confirmed overnight the death of 2 Canadians already on the ground. Also talking about another Canadian who has been asking for consular assistance because they were injured as a result of this conflict. So, Monsieur de Lormier, I'm wondering if you were to advise the current government right now as to how to proceed in Lebanon vis-a-vis the Canadians on the ground, what would your advice be at this point?
Well, my advice would be to prepare for an evacuation. I've said before that I didn't think there would be an evacuation if the situation remained stable between Israel and Hezbollah. But it's quite clear. I think that the Israelis have almost completed their operations in Gaza. So they're turning now towards Lebanon and against Hezbollah, because they want to regain their own territory for their own people in the north of Israel that are being threatened by Hezbollah missiles and others. So I would recommend that we prepare for evacuation. And I heard that this was the case, that there was Canadian military personnel in Cyprus, for example, but Ottawa's not giving out the information now. Do they want this to become a surprise or something? I don't really get it. We did it in 2006, and I don't think we can refuse to do it this time around. The French and the Americans are preparing for this. Of course, they have assets, military assets in the Mediterranean. We don't, so we have to rent out civilian ships and things like that. But that has to be done now. We can't wait until all hell breaks loose.
Monsieur de Lormier, thank you very much. I appreciate the insight this evening.
Thank you very much.
Well, time now for a look at what happened in politics today.
Yeas pour 120 sans 20, nays contre 211 211.
As expected, the Trudeau government survived a motion of non-confidence today. Put forward by Conservatives, the motion did not get the support of any other party in the House, though the heated debate before the vote may be what observers will remember most.
Mr. Speaker, standing up to bullies requires us to call them out on their crap sometimes, and that's what I will do.
The Prime Minister withdrew those words. Conservatives have another opposition day tomorrow, and they have put another confidence motion on the agenda. Meanwhile, the government's controversial increase in the capital gains tax passed today as well. First announced in the spring budget, the change increases the capital gains inclusion rate from 1/2 to 2/3 on gains over $250,000. The bill was passed with support from the NDP. Had it failed to gain approval, the government could have fallen. And staying on the topic of confidence, the Bloc Québécois announced their continued support for the government will come at a cost, demanding that 2 private members' bills sponsored by the Bloc become law by October 29. One bill would increase OAS payments to seniors between the ages of 65 and 74. The other would protect Canada's supply management system in any future trade negotiation. And that is Primetime Politics for this evening. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. As we go this evening, we want to note that French President Emmanuel Macron left New York today to begin a visit here in Canada. It starts tonight in Ottawa, where Macron and the Prime Minister will have a private dinner at Rideau Cottage, to be followed by a much fuller schedule tomorrow when the French President will meet with leaders of the Francophonie in Canada and later the Quebec Premier François Legault. The focus of this visit very much on Franco-Canadian partnerships and cooperation on matters of industry, security, and the environment. We'll have more on that on the next Primetime Politics. Until then, have a good night.